Hello, everyone.
Hi.
It's a pleasure for us to present today. This is kind of exciting for me because I run an organization at Avasta where we're doing a lot of very discrete work for our clients. Like we're not allowed to share who pretty much any of our clients are. So to have a former client here with me, because both of our respective timelines and there's been enough change in the organization to be able to speak to what really happens. And I get to speak about what we really did. And Don gets to speak about what really happens when we were not in the room. And that's always fun for us to learn about as well. So it's a pleasure for us to introduce ourselves. So I'm the founder and CEO of Avasta. This is my beginning of my 13th year being involved in MASB, which makes me feel very old. But my kids tell me I'm old, so that's okay. I'm one of the co-authors of the ISO Brand Evaluation Standard. I helped author the Intellectual Capital in the Boardroom Standard. And I've been teaching the finance of brand management since 2015. So a lot of what you're kind of going and seeing here is an intermix of our expertise that we were able to go and bring to Don's company when she was the CMO of FocusVision, which allows me to go and introduce Don. And Don most recently was the CMO of Software AG, which is a multi-billion-dollar company, 62 countries.
Yep, German software company based in Germany.
And where we worked together on this project that we get to walk you through is when she was a CMO of FocusVision, and she's going to give you a bit of an interesting backstory there. And she was previously a senior director of global marketing brand. How many different things are called?
I founded digital, so I found the last conversation very interesting because I want to know what marketing is in digital these days. So I thought that was a really interesting comment. Some background on Edgar and my relationship. Edgar was brought into Commvault when we were just before $1 billion. And the founders believed that, everyone knew who we were and couldn't understand why we weren't breaking that ceiling. And Edgar was brought in to really understand what was holding us back. And it was by doing a brand study. And I was not the one who commissioned it. I just happened to be in the room during the readout. And it instantly made sense to me that if your brand did not have equity and people didn't know who you were, they couldn't buy you and you could only get to a certain audience size. So Edgar and I literally hit it off instantly. Since then, I was the CMO of FocusVision, which we'll talk about now, and then the CMO of Software AG, and brought Edgar with me 2 other times at the very beginning to really put those marketing metrics and standards in place to be able to measure what success looks like. So very, very excited to be here today with them.
And thank you. So what we're going to cover today is a real world example of why this thing called brand, and there's this really obscure thing called a customer. You may have heard of them, why they're crucial for a company's valuation. So on that note, I'll give you some background to FocusVision. Top 3 themes that we hope that if you sleep through the rest of the presentation, you keep walking away. We're going to cover how brand was a revenue driver at FocusVision, how it was a valuation driver, and we're actually going to tell you what happened. Like, we're not going to kind of leave you on a cliffhanger here and have you come back a year from now or something. And then why did this work? So I'm going to kind of bring back to how the brand evaluation standard was a component of our expertise, and then we're going to give an opportunity for some Q&A and send them to her. I didn't do very much. So on that note, over to you.
So when I met FocusVision, they were PE owned by EQT, which is a European private equity company. They had just acquired 5 market research technology companies, a survey platform, a in-person focus group platform, mobile ethnography, a mobile platform, a mobile focus group platform, and an IDI in-depth interview platform. So those 5 different products from 5 different companies had just been acquired by EQT. And their goal was to bring them together as a single brand and sell them off. An exit is always the end goal with a PE, right? Make money. And so they were looking, I was their first CMO of this new brand. They were looking for somebody who was going to come bring that brand together, create one brand, but also create a brand story and look for a new audience. All of those separate products traditionally sold to market research companies. So a research company, I know Cantor's here today, one of our clients. they would get a project and they would need technology to run those projects, and then they would buy from us on, that one project. And the thing with that is it doesn't create a recurring revenue stream, which we needed to create a recurring revenue stream to meet our EBITDA and to sort of be able to sell the business. And we were very dependent on them winning business. So we needed to get to the companies who were actually collecting the data and who needed the data. And there was a very small amount of those companies in the world, because not everyone has a market research team in-house or is able to use that data. So our ICP was very, very small, but the deal sizes could be really big. So we really needed to understand, okay, how do we get to those companies that could buy from us? How could we get them to know our brand? What roles within that company could we get to? Not just the market researchers, because they certainly did not have the budget to support what we were trying to sell. You didn't put fast enough. Very short into my tenure at FocusVision, something really interesting happened. Qualtrics, which is is purely a survey platform, not the other four things that I talked about, was about to IPO. And SAP came in at the 11th hour and offered them $8 billion not to sell, not to IPO, and they bought them instead. This was under Bill McDermott. His view was that if he could get the O data, which was the human data, to merge with the X data, which is the big data, into one platform, one SAP platform, it becomes much more valuable to companies. So that's why he thought that valuation was so high. That threw the whole market out of whack, right? Because what we thought we were going to be able to make now seemed a whole lot bigger, but how do we prove that value? The mandate was to do that within 2 years. We ended up doing it in 18 months. Pandemic came in the middle of all that. So you have no in-person focus groups when the pandemic hit. So we completely lost one part of the business. And quite frankly, companies didn't know how to react right away. So all research stopped because they just started cutting all of their budgets. So we had to, during the pandemic, really convince people why it was more important than ever to understand your audience and your buyer in order to be able to pivot with what was going on in the world. And with that, like most companies, we panicked. We ended up, the world shut down on Thursday, and I got a call on Monday that we were going to cut staff. No other company that I knew of was going to do that. And I was really involved in executive teams and all of this and outside teams. And I kept asking him, are any of you doing layoffs or furloughs yet? No. And I was quite angry about it. It ended up being the right decision. But it was done very, very quickly. And it was done because, we kept watching those numbers really fast. So again, the charter for me coming in was really creating this one brand, one story that we would be able to sell to the biggest companies in the world. Our clients were Amazon and P&G and Uber and Netflix. We were selling to the biggest companies in the world. So it was because they were the ones that were doing most of the research. They were the ones that could spend the money. So we really need to be able to get to those people in those companies.
Awesome. So here's some major themes to consider as we're going through today, and kind of listen for them. Feel free to tailor your questions either today or follow up with us after. The top three themes are this. Top of mind category association with the brand is absolutely paramount. So people are going and talking about awareness matters. It does matter. It needs to be the right awareness. Just because they've heard of you doesn't mean that they're going to buy from you. You need to go and have an association with the underlying need that's there. And it makes it extremely hard to sell when people don't know what you're associated with. And one of the big things that came out of our work was that name recognition was not enough. And that was, I think, a disconnect that was there with the leadership. They're like, well, people have heard of us. Well, hearing about it is not the same thing. Look, I've heard of the Eiffel Tower. I'm over 40 years old. I still haven't been there.
Most of them heard of us for the in-person focus group equipment.
Yeah.
Right. To this day, in fact, my daughter's away, and she said she was talking to somebody who's in marketing, and she told them that I used to be the CMO of FocusVision, and they said, "Oh, we use them for focus groups." So the association was with the very smallest part of the business.
Yeah. So one of the things that we went and identified in our work when we go and build an outside-in assessment of the market. So what was very different here and the approach that we took is we looked at the market from how people consume the category, not what they already knew about the brand. So we provided I would say, much broader lens to you and your colleagues running FocusVision, because we said, look, what are people associating when they're trying to go and make these purchasing decisions? And what you're going to go and see, I'm terrified about like kill this thing, but there's FocusVision down here, which what it means is people didn't know to mention them. And even if we told them that it existed, they were still not doing really, really well. And this is a company who was one of the originators of the technology in the space over the previous decade. Like, it's like, just because you're first to market didn't guarantee top of mind awareness. So there's another way of kind of going and looking at what the relative disadvantage that was there. FocusVision is right here at the top. So there was only about 4% of the market that actually kind of knew who FocusVision was out of a population of those tens of thousands of corporations that Don's mandate was to go and build the brand with, outside of the traditional roughly 3,000 market research firms globally that were historically the customer base. I don't know if you want to add to that, because I think this shifted the perspective within the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, part of the problem was a lack of marketing, right? There was no story. It was all about what does the technology do, not what, and technically what the technology do, not what it could do for a company. So again, if you're not known for being able to shift, you know, a strategy within a company, which is basically what research does, right? It informs a company. Then we weren't being considered. Now, what Qualtrics did and what Bill McDermott did, who is a brilliant marketer, even though he's CEO, is that he started talking about experience data, and all it was a survey. Right, but he elevated the message so that we all sort of glommed onto it. That you really needed to understand how your customer was feeling, and what they were thinking, so that you could predict how they act as a business. So that really elevated a lot of the messaging to be able to get to a more strategic conversation within the company and be considered.
Yeah. And what I want to add here was very different methodologically here in applying the brand evaluation standard and the principles that are there, is that this was not a pre-screened audience this was tested with. This was people who bought any aspect of the category, because FocusVision was a roll-up of 5 different offerings in that category, and there was no formal industry definition, right? So even though there's industry analyst coverage, that was still within a very restricted audience set. So we needed to understand, how do people view this as a whole, and to be able to go look at things from there. So that kind of objectivity and broad lens to start with was a big driver in the findings that we went and had. So the next one is that the market is ever evolving, and you need to know who you serve. And there's a philosophical bent here in what we're going and saying. Your buyers are different. Like if I go and look at you, how many of you here in the room are just like big early adopters? Like you're waiting to go and use like the next leading edge technology, even if it cuts through your hand. All right. None of you are going to Silicon Valley tomorrow. All right. And how many of you are like, you know, you're going to take this Nokia phone from my cold dead hands? Okay, good. So we're not at that end of the spectrum either. Well, what's critical is when we went and took a look at where FocusVision was, and in that mindset and attitude, both from the buyer spectrum, but also how they thought about the category, FocusVision wasn't across the board. And what we were able to go and identify was that FocusVision was actually used by people who had grown up with FocusVision over the previous 15 years. So over to you, Don.
Yeah, no, and that's true, right? So we weren't the right choice, or it would have been much harder for us to get to those smaller, more agile, more innovative companies, because there would be a whole lot of work to do. And quite frankly, the product didn't behave like a modern product, right? So it was it would have been a hard sell. SurveyMonkey, you know, anyone can do. College students are doing it. You know, high school students are doing it. It was easier. That's what they're going to use. It's faster. But FocusVision, the advantage across those 5 things was really understanding the quantitative and qualitative outcomes, not just quantitative. So we had to get to the serious researchers. We had to get to the companies who were willing to make that investment because their business depended on it. So it did get us to narrow what does that audience look like, who should we go after, and not waste our time because we weren't the right fit for the rest of the market. That I think was a real big eye opener for our board, especially because for EQT, it was one of their first technology companies. So to them, technology was new and shiny and innovative no matter what it was. It didn't matter that it was a 15-year-old product. So they really didn't understand the technology industry and that, it had different levels of sophistication and adoption. And that's where Avasta really can help with this type of view.
Yeah. So then the third major theme is that TAM, so total addressable market alone, is a misleading guide for growth potential. So when we walked into the situation, we got briefed by the team at FocusVision. One of the reference points that we had was this macro study of all research spend globally. And it was like almost $50 billion. And I think I can disclose this. FocusVision is less than $1 billion in revenue at the time. So you can just kind of imagine, okay, hold on, something's making sense, right? They have roughly 4% top of mind category association. They have less than 2% category revenue. Maybe there's like macro category revenue. So maybe what you need to do is figure out like who your customer is and kind of like what Don was alluding to, right? We're not going and selling to the whole spectrum. We're not at the bleeding edge. We're not at the, the laggards at the tier end. Like who within here can kind of be an adopter of our products and services, and how are they different? How do they need to be marketed to be different? That was Don's challenge to us, is how do we answer those questions?
But I also will say it's really important to understand there that the goal was exit. The goal was not growth, right? So if we invested a lot of money in marketing and got out of whack with what our spend was and what our EBITDA was, we weren't reaching the goal of the business. So in order to reach the goal of the business, we had to figure out where was our sweet spot in the market? How much do we have to spend to increase our footprint in that part of the market, and then exit. Yeah. So it being that specific on what success looks like and how do you get there, the data is crucial.
So folks that are here from MASB are familiar with one of the presentations I gave earlier this year on the evolution from TAM. So total addressable market, this is the norms, serviceable, obtainable, et cetera. The problem with those is that's a term that's been used as a shorthand for 25 years. We think it's like 150 years old. It's not. TAM is a 25-year-old phenomenon used to go and show large numbers credibly. So we introduced the winnable addressable market principle at the conference here, but Dawn was a beneficiary of this understanding 4 years ago when she was at FocusVision, because what we needed to find out is where would her budget have the greatest ROI? Like the goal here is not how marketers can go and execute tactically or have good creative. It's where to deploy it with the dollars and cents that are available. So in the winnable addressable market point of view, the goal is to go and identify the customer who's worth pursuing given the circumstances of your business. And as Don went and said, the customer worth pursuing by a private equity owned company that's trying to sell this thing within 18 months, that's just lost the line of business. There's a global health cataclysm, and your largest competitor just got for more than 2 times the amount of money that they thought they were worth.
Yeah.
Does that give you some context? Isn't it the easiest job in the world? So this is what we were helping her, is like, who is that ICP? And we're going to kind of dive into that in a moment. So that's right there. So brand is a revenue driver. And the goal here was to understand who FocusVision had equity with. So this meant that FocusVision could sell to these companies, which is very different that they could buy from them. I hope you kind of pick up on that nuance, because the illusion that we're going and seeing is a lot of people are making decisions on the fact that people can have their products and services, their company's products and services be bought. That's very different from the fact that will they actually buy it from you? Can you sell it to them? Is very different as a concept. So it was very critical to understand where you stand versus competitors. So how did you stand versus competitors?
Kind of in the middle. As we said, FocusVision had been around for a long time in the focus group area, but we had a hard time differentiating from the past, and when you take a look at, and there were some digital components of those, right? So if you take a look at Survey Gizmo and Survey Monkey, they have survey in their title, which means their SEO is automatically, beneficial there because they're coming to the top of their search. So if somebody's looking for research technology or they're looking for surveys, they have it already. That's why I don't understand how digital, all marketing isn't digital in some way. Even your events are digital. So, we didn't have that, which would have cost a lot of money. In fact, we did a test on that, on how much it would cost to be on the top of the page. It was $250,000 for 1 week. Not sustainable at all. And we also knew that, we were going to have to be very, very targeted in the story we told and the outcome that was going to happen. And the way to understand that is, what do they care about when they were making that purchase? It wasn't features, it wasn't functionality, it was outcomes. And how do we talk to that outcome?
So one of the ways that we were able to answer that, and it's not visible in this slide because we're going to get a little bit too much into the weeds of the business, but we were able to identify the spectrum of technology leadership and where was the need that Dawn was just alluding to, a match for where technology leadership was. And one of the big strengths that was there was around product functionality. And while FocusVision was middle of the pack on average across the spectrum, there was use cases where FocusVision was by far the best in class. People knew about it. And what this became a conversation about was getting other people who had the same need to know that FocusVision had that capability. So it was also important to know why people went and bought you, right? This is building on that complex need situation. And to your point about, Survey Gizmo and the SEO that was there, one of the challenges that was there for FocusVision was then going and trying to understand where things were in the marketplace. We're now kind of starting to introduce Confirm It here because that is another brand that entered the picture within the story and the narrative as we're going to continue the story of FocusVision and what happened. What we're also kind of going and seeing is that people didn't relate to FocusVision as a research company, which is kind of ironic considering that they came from the research industry. But this is looking at it from the total market perspective, right? This was business buyers. This was insights departments at Fortune 500 companies. This is market intelligence or product marketing teams or product development teams in Silicon Valley. And that association wasn't there. If you want to add to that.
No.
Great. So as a summary, you can kind of go and see there was a lot of gaps and there was a mind share advantage that Qualtrics went and had, further amplified by what Bill McDermott did. And that was the big elephant in the room when we walked in. And kind of nobody briefed us initially. But it very quickly became the reality that Qualtrics being worth so much was an issue. So what we went and did is by starting broadly, starting neutrally, and honing into the operating restrictions that Dawn and her peers were under, and going into where there was actually credible demand and equity and adjacency in the market, we took this assessment and we went and identified that there was about a $2 billion winnable addressable market. For a company with well below $1 billion in revenue, $2 billion is a ton of money. Okay.
Below 100 million. It was a big
I'm not
runway.
saying
Yeah,
you're saying
I said it.
So that was the piece that's there. So what did we identify was a winnable addressable market? So keep in mind, this is not market research firms anymore. This is businesses. Where do they have credibility with businesses? And what we identified that this was actually a very specific sector of the market. And because of the precision by cross-referencing internal data, which is another evolution of how we apply the brand evaluation standard, is we married external data, we married industry data, but we mapped to what the company had internally. Who was in the CRM? Who was in the pipeline? Who were salespeople having success with? Where was their demand for, can I understand this product better? And it came into even these very specific subsegments that were there in the financial services space. And then I would add the next piece, and Dawn, I'd love to know what happened in the room after we left presenting this, which is don't sell here.
Yeah, a lot of times most companies unless they've done the research, have a hard time focusing, right? And they believe the more people we sell to, the more money we can make. What they don't understand is if you focus the right market and the right buyer, you're going to be far more successful than trying. This is a very American term that I use all the time, rather than spreading it like peanut butter across everything. So I really, with the help of Edgar, had to convince them that focus was going to get us where we need to go. And it was going to get us the margin, which was the really important part, right? Because as a private equity, they were really focused on that margin and that EBITDA, because that was a multiplier that they were going to get. Once I brought those words into the room, I got that credibility because I understood what the measurement they cared about. I wasn't talking about, getting to X number of the market or trying to engage with the market or trying to get, sales, numbers of sales. I was trying to get high value, high margin metrics. And that is exactly what they cared about.
Yeah, and to be able to provide the evidence for the fact that you didn't want to sell to these is because at every single stage of the organizational spend cycle, so from what Dawn owned in her budget in marketing and kind of call it creating or activating market, to the chief revenue officer, right? The CRO who had to deploy sales staff to pursue these opportunities, we identified that those 4 sectors were reliably a net negative. So yes, you made profit on an individual sale, but the cost of trying to acquire a customer in this space, if you look at the total cost, you have to sell to 15 automotive companies to get 1 transaction, that's a really expensive sale. So by identifying this quickly and financially, Dawn had the ammunition to know, I need to shift my budgets. I don't need to necessarily have more budget. I need to reliably shift it.
Never got more budget.
Yeah. So let's go and shift to brand as a valuation driver and why FocusVision needed to address the Qualtrics quadrant. So one of the things that you're going and seeing here is, I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but Qualtrics was going to be like the first research industry IPO. They priced themselves at $2.5 billion. Dawn already came in and said, like, hey, in the 11th hour, $8 billion valuation, which was over 2 times what they went and valued themselves. Now, they were bought a year after you came into FocusVision?
No, probably within 6 months. It was really, really, really fast.
Yeah.
Within 6 months.
So what happened is there was an internal valuation for folks who worked at private equity or venture capital backed companies. There's always kind of like a running number of how much your business is worth or is going to be worth in the future. Well, this happened very early in FocusVision's ownership period. So they bought FocusVision for some, and then they went and learned, oh, it's Monday. Qualtrics just got bought for 2.5 times the valuation. That means we're worth 2.5 times the valuation, right?
I wrote a blog about this on my LinkedIn page if anyone's interested.
So that was the elephant in the room that we had to deal with because there was still a running commentary within the organization. Can we argue for 2.5 times our own valuation from when we got bought without fundamentally changing the business?
There was only one Bill McDermott, right? There wasn't another Bill McDermott out there.
Yeah. So that was a big part that's there. So what we went and did is we built a map of the categories. So just as we went and showed you at the beginning, right? We started at the total buyer universe of people who go and buy. We had to come back and show the leadership, especially the board, that FocusVision wasn't everywhere. They didn't have the right to value themselves across the spectrum. And what you're seeing here is a collage of over 240 competitors that FocusVision went and had that were gaining attention in dollars. And there's a concept that we walked through with Dawn. I don't know how much this kind of got traction within the organization, but for every dollar that Dawn was spending on marketing with a company with less than $100 million in revenue, there was 240 companies spending thousands of dollars per Dawn's dollar. That's a very important consideration that's there because the customer base is getting thrown with thousands of dollars of messaging for every Dawn dollar of messaging.
Which means I could not break through.
So you needed to find out who was even interested. And that was the big driver that's there. So we understood what the valuation drivers were, and we were able to kind of figure out what was going on. And what this did is it created a catalyst within the organization to go and see, well, look, if we're not going to knock off Qualtrics off their perch because they got Bill McDermott running the show, what's the alternative that we have? And what ended up happening is, this was a category-wide, outside in, customer neutral. And there was intelligence that was gathered also on the rest of the competition. So I want to emphasize something that's here. In this approach, everything that was presented to FocusVision was equally applicable to their competitors. You could run the whole exercise if you were the owner of Confirmit or you're the owner of SurveyMonkey and get an understanding of what drove their performance.
Absolutely.
And so this started a conversation within the organization, I think within a matter of months,
Yes.
about going and saying, well, look, if we're both weak, are we better together? So the advantage that was there is that the FocusVision team now knew more about Confirmit's performance in the market than the Confirmit team. They're nice friends now, but Dawn, do you want to talk about what that was like?
They're all in one. So, understanding that, they owned a very niche part of the market. We owned a very niche part of the market. Both were private equity owned, right? The private equity soon realized, well, ours realized it, that if we brought it together, we actually could create an asset that was even more valuable. So, the initial goal was to either, sell just the company, but what would happen was, EQT, was it Avasta?
Finastra.
Finastra. EQT went to Finastra and said, hey, you buy a certain percentage of the company, we'll continue to keep our investment, a small investment, and eventually we'll look at 2 more years for an exit together, which means we can multiply our initial investment. So that's what ended up happening.
Yeah. And so this was all kind of brought together to the leadership team that was there. And this is where the finance side came in full force. Because working with the finance and the sales and the marketing team allowed us to understand what was the probable outcome if they just kept the business going the way that they were going. And we had the evidence from the buyer base, from people who were buying, from people who had stopped buying, which was one of the big challenges that FocusVision had, is that their legacy customer base was larger than their active customer base. So more people have used them in the past than were using them in the present, and we're planning on using them in the future. Confirmit's problem was that not many people wanted to buy them in the future. So by having that intelligence, we were able to go and take a look at, well, what does it look like if you just invest a little bit of money into the company?
And one of the things was, when we presented to the board was, here's how much you're actually going to have to invest in marketing in order to get to that initial exit price that you want.
Yeah.
And there was no way they were looking to put more money after their investment. Most private equities, when they say they're coming in to invest, it's just they cut to invest. They don't actually bring in money. So once we were able to really clearly articulate how much investment it was going to take in order for them to actually get their goal, that's when they started saying, we've got to look at other scenarios. So this was really, really valuable because they could have wasted a lot of money. They could have lost a lot of money, but coming in from the market view side, again, winnable market, really changed the entire strategy.
Yeah. To kind of summarize it, the value of doing nothing was a lot worse than the value of doing something.
Because then they were going to end up losing money.
Yeah. And we were able to kind of go and demonstrate that over time. And another aspect that's here is we were looking at things on a rolling basis. So we were not looking at snapshots. We're not looking at, balance sheet. We're not looking at a report from 2 years ago. We were looking at the transition over time in the sales and marketing performance. And what we now added was the expected sales and marketing performance, so that the team at FocusVision knew what they were going to grow into if they did nothing, if they shifted budgets, or if they went to the board and said, can we get some support? So what happened? So things move fast. And even in private equity terms, this is very fast, considering that they just lost a major product line in the spring of 2020. So we came in, we did our work in summer 2020, gave the intelligence. I think the approach happened in the fall of 2020. By spring 2021, the companies had merged and they turned into what you may have heard of as Forsta. And all the private equity firms were very happy because they sold the following winter to Prestini for an undisclosed but larger sum of money. So Dawn kicked ass, and she got to say that, because she had a very restricted operating model in which to go and transition the company. And I think we did all right. So why did all of this work? I think you've kind of heard some of the themes that are here, but a lot of this was from the principles that are in the brand evaluation standard, which doesn't get enough credit at all. And what we did is we behaviorally and financially evaluated the company and the market from the perspective of the end buyer. The biggest fault that myself in my career have seen is people are not sufficiently engaged in the customer. They have it as a concept, they have it as a reporting metric, but they don't really get them. And for your customer, the shorthand, regardless of whether it is your technology, whether it's your salespeople, whether it's your marketing, whether it's your CEO, it's brand. That's the shorthand that they go and use. So you need to understand the range of that shorthand. And this approach helped FocusVision here understand what that shorthand was. And a lot of it didn't look very good from the perspective of the customer. And that's what had to be solved for. Second one is identifying the buying cycle from the perspective of the end buyer and why they buy. How many of you are working in organizations? You don't need to put your hand up, but this is like call it a retrospective for yourself. How many of you and your leadership teams and your employees, your peers, know why your customer buys your products and services? Not how, not where, not when, not for how much. Why they buy. And we were able to answer that question for FocusVision. People wanted to have confidence in the business decision that they made. FocusVision had the technology and the expertise to provide a necessary ingredient to them. Once we understood why they bought, we were able to make a lot better decisions. I identified where the brand was impaired, right? Where it was more historic users than current users and less intended users. And to what Don alluded to, we figured out how to accelerate shipping budgets and being able to credibly demonstrate from very pure finance terms, because that's how EQT operated, the value of adding incremental investment. Adding in more money into FocusVision was actually going to make them more money than not adding more money into the business. And lastly, when you integrate into company data, you're able to actually get the full picture. So my big takeaway from this also that I can share is don't depend just on third parties for their expertise. Roll that into your internal organizational data. I feel privileged to be on the inside with my team at Avasta, with our clients, and knowing what's actually going on. We want to know where the skeletons are hiding in the closet, because at some point the door is going to fall off the hinges. So the point of this is that these principles help you run better businesses because they allow you to understand how to go and understand, relate to your customer or consumer. And ultimately, the common currency between you and your customer base is your brand. So you better make sure that it's the most valuable one that you can go and make available. So thank you. And questions for her. I'm happy to answer questions as well. So any questions in the room?
So it looks like you had, this is very fascinating, because 10% talk about this, because I've come across them. Then I know why. You did. It was brought in later. But this was an awareness problem, generally.
It was a consideration and a market problem, right? Because
Yeah, it was a market targeting.
yes, but it was a brand awareness problem, right? So any company walking into a facility to do a focus group, and all companies did that, would automatically see the FocusVision brand because it was on the machines, right? But when they were sitting at their desks trying to figure out, how do we figure out how our customers buy, or how do we figure out why they buy, or is price a consideration, or they weren't considering coming to us or buying from us. So, getting in front of somebody, the biggest part of marketing is being considered when the purchase is going on, right? That's the whole purpose of marketing. I was having a conversation this morning and someone said, their marketing students don't want to go into sales. It is sales. It's the very beginning of sales, right? So you have to be considered. but you don't want to be considered by everyone. You need to be considered by those that have the budget and the need. And so that was really the goal.
When you look at the said you looked at drivers and customer decision making. Yeah. Did you take it a step further? Were there changes? Other parts of the business? That
Absolutely.
would
Yeah.
drive it. Did it lead to changes? For example, and I've come across all sorts. So it's kind of a loaded question. For example, in technology, because if you're building the power of a brand, you increase its awareness, all like you deliver it.
No, right. There's actually two places. There's technology and it was sales. Right? Because if we were going to sell to non-researchers, non-technical researchers, because we were always selling to technical researchers, so they knew how to program a survey, right? They knew how to set up, virtual rooms because they had to as part of their jobs. Now we were trying to sell to the insights team within the big marketing team. They didn't have those skill sets. So in order for them to be able to use the technology had to become more user-friendly and it had to be more familiar to them, right? The second part was our sales team had no idea how to talk to anybody but that technical researcher. So we could gather all the leads we want and pass them over. But if they couldn't continue that conversation and talk about what the output was going to be, the sale never happened. So it had to change the behavior of product sales and marketing, the whole go-to-market motion, right? And our customer success, our customer service, because customer service had to get more deeply involved with those teams to get them skilled up to be able to take care of to be able to use the product and take advantage of that product. So, there's a very misunderstanding I find in marketing that it's marketing. It's part of your go-to market strategy. So all of those things needed to change because marketing can't just say, hey, we're going to go after, Amazon's marketing team. If our sales team can't do it, if they can't use the product, and if we don't have the right services in place to make them be successful. So the entire strategy needed to change.
Did it?
Yes.
Did they
Yeah.
invest in
Enough.
technology?
Enough. That's the thing, right? It's a huge shift for companies to do that. But we could do
So
it enough.
technology.
We could do it enough.
Needs some improvements.
Well, yes, but we could replace the problem with technology taking a long time to be improved with a bang up customer service team, customer success team, and making it part of the sale.
And I want to add something to, like, Dawn's constraint that was here, right? This thing had to be sold within 18 months. So there was all of these like 2 to 4 year investment cycles. They were validated, but they were handed off to the post-merger sales.
Yeah.
So it's now
That's
the
what
new,
forces-
the new
And they
owner's
keep doing
problem.
that.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and
Right.
then they're pursuing that.
But they're pursuing it.
They're pursuing it, but they knew that you can't go and do a 4 year product cycle in 6 months.
Exactly. So it could be good
Yeah.
enough, but you were gonna have to backfill that with customer success,
And
which
this
is
goes-
people.
And which goes back to who not to sell to, because that's where FocusVision was so far away from the insights department's requirements versus the banking sector and the insurance sector was closer to complex engagements. So they had that greater affinity. And yeah, please go
We
ahead.
will say we sold on that potential, right? That
Yeah.
the market potential was there if all those things happened. So it helped the multiplier. Again, it supported the goal of the company.
So presumably you had to shift the structure of the sales team.
Yeah,
And how difficult was it to get them on board with new story,
bloody.
new narrative,
was
new
bloody.
product, new everything?
it was bloody. It
Did
was.
Did people leave? Did you have to fire people? Did you?
It was, we ended up really downsizing that's why I said it ended up being the right thing, right? Because when the pandemic hit and we had to downsize to watch the margins, we ended up really cutting a lot of our sales team. And we went to those that we found were most strategic, understood the bigger picture better, which gave us a smaller team and smaller audience to continue those conversations, right? Because again, if we only sold to 10 and we had, 25 salespeople, it's really only 6 or 7 now. And this is the role in any company, right? 20% of your sales team makes 80% of your number. So we kept that part,
It
and
wasn't
that
like
was
you got rid of all the people that sold CPG
Exactly.
and retail. It was
Exactly.
actually you were keeping people for the value and their ability to change.
right,
It
exactly.
became use case based versus industry vertical. And then you
absolutely.
found the use case industry vertical split from our work. And that is, I think, what really resonated. And I think it carried the business through the Forrester rebrand. Like I would say they've only in the past year, maybe, and I know like most of the leadership team that you were working with is gone now, but it's under the kind of like new guys, to Joanne's point about like the rest of the business. The stuff that was slower moving is now finally starting to manifest, because this transaction only closed 2 years
I
ago.
will say, in my most recent role, I was a customer then of Foresight. Because I believed in the power of having my own voice of customer platform, my own team measuring that. So I got to see as a customer a lot of the changes that started.
Edgar?
Yeah.
Could you elaborate a little bit on the kinds of conversations you were having with your finance people while all of this was occurring?
Yeah, so I can speak to that, because on our team, I was the primary liaison with the CFO and also with, I think the operating board member.
Yes.
From the EQT. And a lot of what we had to go and take a look at, Dave, was, we had to actually match the time periods between the different functions. That was probably the biggest gap that we noticed in the work that we had. So you had marketing, who was anywhere from 6 to 24 months ahead of the sales cycle. Then the sales cycle was anywhere from 6 to 24 months ahead of the finance cycle. And then the finance team wasn't really looking at it because they were looking at budgets on a quarterly basis on what we're going to go and spend versus what do we want to achieve in the future. So Dawn hadn't even been there for 4 years. So she inherited a pipeline that was already going through the marketing cycle, going through the sales
It was
cycle.
the wrong pipeline.
Yeah. And then the finance team was making what I would say point in time decisions. So we had to restructure the databases to be able to show them their own data over time. So to show the flow of marketing activity, transferring to sales activity, transferring to financial performance. And it was through that approach that we were able to demonstrate that there was those sectors that didn't matter how much money was being thrown in at the product or the marketing side, was not going to pay off 2 to 4 years later in financial value. So that time lag effect, and in a B2B organization, it's really critical. Like, look, I worked at P&G. I know at P&G, you wanted to go and get your sales up for the month, boom, do a last minute sale in the last week, get the emergency flyer out there or the insert, and oh, shocking, we hit our number, right? That was not a lever Dawn could pull where she could go and do that. So that part was really critical. So, I teach at the graduate level, and one of the things that I've been teaching for 10 years is the concept of the brand factory. It's the intangible version of how a factory brings a company revenue. You don't decide to build a factory on a Monday and by Friday it's generating revenue. It takes months, if not years. It's a lot of different moving parts. And this is a concept that Dawn, as a strategic marketer, measurement driven, fully understands. You need to understand how to curate your brand, how to activate your brand, and how to build your brand all at the same time without enough budget. So hopefully that answered your question.
A little bit.
A little bit? Say more.
Well, it can actually to be commended for just doing the time sync.
Yes.
I think that's, and I think marketing has to do that. I don't think the finance people are able to do that.
The most finance organizations I work with do not know how to do that.
Yeah. I think they understand it once you do it, but I don't think they know how to do it.
Yeah.
So it's really something that marketing needs. But in the meantime, you've still got your finance people thinking about all the places they can allocate funds. They're thinking about future value versus present value. I mean, there's a whole set of financial issues. And
so if I can address that future versus present value, there was a lot of industry norms and heuristics being used in the finance calculations. Like everything came down to an industry WACC, but nobody actually went and looked at what weighted average cost of capital. So if I went and deployed $1 million somewhere else, what should I expect as a return? The problem with this is, I would say 99 out of 100 finance organizations I've worked with, all weighted average cost of capital calculations are rolling 12-month numbers. If your business needs to make decisions that take more than 12 months to manifest, that is the worst number you can use. So we help them figure out how to calculate a present value of expectable future revenue. And maybe that is more of what you're kind of alluding to there, Dave.
I also think we're able to demonstrate the past,
Yeah.
which is a very big, because, you know, when you predict the future, someone can choose to believe you or not believe you, no matter what data you have, right? But when you go back to the past and you say, hey, we cut and we were able to map this out. When you cut here, 12 months later, we saw it here. Then you cut here and we saw it here. And then you cut here and then we saw it here. But then you raised and we saw it go up. Once we were able to show the correlation between the spend and the outcomes in that time base, it changed the whole conversation. Because now it happened, not we predicted it's going to happen.
Yeah, so hopefully it answers.
Which is where that first party data comes in so important, because you can't get that from third party data.
I just think the lesson here is that you had to teach the finance people
Always,
the finance lesson.
always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's absolutely the case. And like, it goes back to like, and you know, we've touched upon this before on LinkedIn with Don the other night. There is no corporate strategy if you don't understand the market that you're selling to. Like, I mean, like really understand it. And you're not a marketer if you don't understand the market that you're marketing to.
So many tangents to go off.
Like, there's so much we can go. We're not going to go this way.
Hours.
But
We can
this,
take days up here.
but this was a challenge for the organization. They assumed at the time of acquiring this company, before Don and much of the executive team came in, they made the assumption, oh, we made it in market research, we can make it in corporate America. No. It's not a guarantee. And that's what we were able to kind of go and demonstrate. It's a great question, Dave. And I think there was another question I
Right
saw.
over here.
Yeah, go ahead. Hey, Mark.
Hey,
Long time.
I seen you. Just following up on that, like you used a lot of, or mentioned a lot of metrics and measures.
Yeah.
And that's typically natural, I would say, that you'll come up with many things you would like to keep track on and measure. But what would you say was the most important one? Maybe-
Pipeline and revenue, 100% of the time, pipeline and revenue. Marketers get very tangled up in measuring 1,000 things, and we have to. Like, we have to. I'm not saying that you shouldn't. But when you're going to the business to talk about the business, they care about what does your pipeline look like, because how are you going to make your revenue numbers, right? So even though the goal was, you know, monthly recurring revenue and ARR and all of those other metrics that they were looking at, in marketing, I really had to focus on, do you have the pipeline to make that number? And if you don't have the pipeline and we're not being considered, no miracle is going to happen. You're not making that number.
I'm going to add one thing from what Don said here to your point about the backtracking as well. And I think this also answers Dave's question that's there. A lot of organizations are setting targets, financial targets. And that was, I think, a curse that you and your peers were afflicted with. But people just go and say, well, we expect you to grow, you know,
Based on the cost of the business.
15 million bucks this quarter versus last year without changing budget. And it was just like the setting of the target was the objective. But what we could go and do by looking at the pipeline and revenue and the components that fed pipeline and converted to revenue and look at it backwards, we could go and identify the extent to which typically it was an too high of a target, but sometimes companies put too low of a target because they didn't understand actual demand in the market. We could reconcile past targeting, and we made a much more responsible finance organization in being able to push back at what I would call objective oriented targets. Like, we need to hit this objective to be able to hit the valuation multiple to sell this company. That was called the private equity layer. And finance didn't know how to argue back against that because they didn't know if it was an achievable target until it was achieved or not. By doing this work, you know, Don was a big catalyst of it, was we were able to go and identify how much of past targets were credible, and then use that information to demonstrate how much of future targets were credible or pulled out of the nether regions.
But I will add, there is pipeline in both B2C and B2B. I've had these extensive conversations. I'm actually married to a B2C guy, finance. So we have some really good heated conversations. And there is pipeline. You understand, you know, the audience that you're getting to, the amount of audience that you're getting to, what that conversion is on that audience, and what it's going to lead in revenue, and you understand, no matter what you're selling, how long it takes to get somebody.
Okay.
The marketing strategic story behind it is a very old story, right? It's about segmenting and targeting.
Sadly, it is so basic, but people seem to want to make it
is
something
really
else.
easy, But the problem is focus. I think it's focus.
Yeah.
Because again, as Edgar said, anyone can buy from you, but are they the right buyers? And can you actually sell them?
But you need to know who to target, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. All starts with an ICP, which I think
Yeah.
is coming up. So.
Perfect.
I have one last.
Please.
It's a silly question. The name. I would guess that they did not involve from a financial perspective in looking at potential financial impact. Name.
Oh, absolutely. I was very involved in that. So I exited 6 months into the acquisition. I was retained for that 6 months to help with what is that brand going to look like moving forward. We understood what the brand value.
Forsta one. Right?
Forsta,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
We understood what the brand value of FocusVision and Confirm It was, and why that needed to be renamed, so that we could shed some of the negativity with that, but also be able to build equity into this new brand. So I was very involved in that. A lot of the recent decisions and a lot of the research that we did was,
Yeah.
based on the work that Edgar's team did.
But I do want to add, I think you might have alluded to the FocusVision name. So you came in after the roll-up had been rebranded. to FocusVision,
Yeah, and the
right?
reason why they chose FocusVision was because it was the best known brand. Didn't matter that it's known for one thing, it was the best known brand. Now, I could have focused my time on, we need to rebrand. I had a really short runway. So I was much more focused on who can I sell to, how can I get that margin up, and what are the financials that are gonna achieve this goal?
It's part of the reason I didn't ask me that question. The clients I found from using Forsta. One particular example, it's quite recent, is the senior client. And actually, I think all the seniors think that Forsta is Forrester.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes, they all, and I read that in other companies.
Yeah, there's a little brand with there.
There is, yeah, that's why I was
Forsta
questioning
is
the name a bit.
Forsta is actually a Norwegian word that means truth. That's how they came up with Forsta. It's very hard to find a unique name.
I'm
and
well
to be
aware of that.
covering. So it was actually a creative team out of Dublin. And we did all kinds of research, and that's how we came up with Forsta.
Right, well, I think we're gonna have to.
I know, we've been up on for much
Well,
longer than
thank
we
you.
thought we were gonna be.
Yeah. Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Turning